It's now been 2 weeks since free agent negotiations began, and the Chicago Bears are done with all of their big signings. So now's a good time to check in and hand out grades for the moves that Ryan Poles has and hasn't made so far.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms, including the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. On the show today, we will hand out grades to all the moves Ryan Poles made this offseason, and that includes trades as well, but moves during this free agent period where there have been some great additions in terms of weapons to surround presumably Caleb Williams here, some other moves to fill holes on this roster that certainly get the job done, even if they leave a little bit more waiting or left to be desired there, and also some moves that Ryan Poles wasn't able to make, with certainly the NFL draft still an option for the team to keep adding to this Bears roster. But I wanted to expand this to not just be free agent signings, because the biggest move Ryan Poles made since the start of free agency was not a free agent signing at all, but it was the trade for wide receiver Keenan Allen. Without a doubt, that is the biggest move the Bears have made in terms of making the biggest positive impact on this roster this season. Like, we're not going to grade, the Justin Fields trade because they didn't gain any players. We're talking about grading the Bears' additions, essentially, this offseason. That's obviously a huge consequential move, but in terms of what they're adding to this roster right now, Keenan Allen comes in as a game changer. Not only literally a game changer on game day, but also a game changer in terms of how this offense looks and how the Bears are able to support and build around a young quarterback. And so if I had to assign a grade right away to Keenan Allen trade, to me, that trade is an instant A. You gave up a fourth-round pick to get a veteran wide receiver who's coming off one of the best seasons of his career, 1,200 yards, huge production across the board, to then pair him with DJ Moore. Think about where the Chicago Bears would be at wide receiver right now if they didn't have Keenan Allen and hadn't made that trade. Maybe Ryan Poles would have been more aggressive in trying to sign one of the lingering free agents at that position, but even by the time they made that trade, there wasn't a ton of great talent sitting there left at the wide receiver market. We had seen a lot of the better players ending up signing somewhere else. Like, maybe they go out at that time and instead, they sign a Tyler Boyd from Cincinnati, who I would not have been upset about, or Josh Reynolds from the Detroit Lions. But that's not a wide receiving core that you end up feeling great about Caleb Williams coming into. But instead, he gets DJ Moore on one side and Keenan Allen on the other. To me, that is absolutely an A trade for the Chicago Bears. I think what maybe keeps it from being an A+ is obviously Keenan Allen's age, and also just the fact that it's a 1-year contract as of right now, although I've heard that they're in negotiations for a contract extension, not anything imminent, but are working to keep Keenan Allen here longer, and they had to pay him an extra $5 million on that roster bonus. So the Bears had to pay for it, but a fourth-round pick is still great value for Keenan Allen, and also I still think his production is at such a high level, and the Bears have the salary cap to absorb it, that it's all around a really strong move that sets up this young quarterback to come in and have better weapons than most number one overall picks ever come into, and better weapons than most of the other rookie quarterbacks are going to come into this season. I'm left wishing, though, that Ryan Poles had been, I don't know if a little more aggressive is the right word, or had swung a little bit bigger and higher at the center position, where he addressed it in multiple ways, but I'm not left feeling like super confident that the Bears really nailed it and left no questions at center. So first, he traded a 5th-round pick to the Buffalo Bills for Ryan Bates, and then not long before the Keenan Allen trade, they signed Coleman Shelton as a free agent from the Los Angeles Rams. And given that they're both addressing the same position, I'm going to just kind of grade those together here. Like, the grade is really how Ryan Poles addressed center. I mean, that's kind of the whole story here is like the Keenan Allen grade is how he addressed wide receiver so far. And this is how he addressed center so far. And we'll get into safety and running back and some other things here in a moment. But Coleman Shelton comes over as a 16-game, starter for the Rams last season, somebody who they relied on as their starting center. Ryan Bates has started in the past, someone the Bears had tried to pursue in free agency's past. So there's a clear, enthusiasm, I think, from Ryan Poles for those two players. But I'm left feeling like each one carries some levels of question marks with it, and I would have wanted more of a concrete, no questions answer for the center position. So if I combine Shelton and Bates as one collective grade for the center position, I find myself lingering around a C there, where it's like, okay, Shelton is a starting caliber NFL center, but I think he's a lower end starting caliber NFL center. And Bates has been a backup and was a backup for the Bills. So I can't expect either one to come in here and be great. They just need to come in here and be good enough, right? The bar is low. I mean, that's why it's not like a D or an F here. Like, it's not like the Bears did nothing at center or just brought back Lucas Patrick. I'm just not convinced how much of an upgrade they are. I think they are an upgrade over what the Bears had from Lucas Patrick last season, and it'll be a competition between those two to find one of them to be a starting center and the other one will be the backup and have some versatility there. And I like that it wasn't just Bates and that it wasn't just Shelton. If it had just been one or the other, this might be a D grade there for just saying you're putting all your eggs in that basket. So at least they got two baskets for their eggs here and could still address center in the draft and draft one in the 3rd or 4th round to have, another developmental player behind them to build up for the future here. But in the short term for this year, either Shelton or Bates is going to be your starter, and hopefully they're fine. But I wanted to get through free agency not feeling like the answer at center was hopefully they're fine, right? I really wanted all 5 offensive line positions are locked in. Caleb Williams, center, is locked in. And it's locked in. It'll be one of those two guys, but not locked in on which guy it'll be. And I don't want to keep going through a competition and have different people snapping to Caleb Williams throughout this whole process. I know it's hard. You can't just sit here and say, oh, Ryan Poles should have signed the most expensive center or should have done X, Y, or Z. To me, it's not like, oh, he should have done this exact move instead, but it's like, I don't know, it felt like he was very quick to make the Bates move and then kind of lingered and got the Shelton move. And I would have liked center to be more of a priority and more of a sure thing there than what they got, but they still addressed it in some way. And that's where I end up coming back to a C grade at the center position. So those were the key biggest moves around the young quarterback. But I think the other moves on offense, which was clearly the emphasis in free agency this year, the other moves on offense will help quite a bit as well. I'm a big fan of what they got from Gerald Everett, less so of DeAndre Swift, but we'll see how that equates into grades. And then we still have to turn our attention to what Ryan Poles has and hasn't done on defense next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. How's your college basketball bracket looking right now? I'm guessing it's not doing so great, but that's okay because whether your bracket is number 1 in your pool or in last place, you can keep betting on every game of the tournament with our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether you're riding some number 1 seeds or you're hoping one of these Cinderella stories continues, it's time to go dancing on America's number 1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So you bet $5 on anything, not just college basketball, but any sport. If your $5 bet is correct, not only do you get the winnings from your $5 bet, but then they will add on top of that an extra $200 in bonus bets that you can use to bet on point spreads, money lines, who's going to win the whole thing. I mean, you name it. They've got NFL draft prop bets as well. Justin Fields, Steelers prop bets for next season as well. So to claim your $200 in bonus bets, just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops till they cut down the nets. Keenan Allen was my favorite move that Ryan Poles made this offseason, but not far behind it was the signing of Gerald Everett. Certainly before the Keenan Allen trade was made, Everett to me was the best move Ryan Poles had made up to this point. To add a pass catcher to this offense who's a really good fit with what they already have and will give a young quarterback something that he wouldn't have already had, something that he needs, something that adds to his toolkit there, right? It's not just depth at the tight end position, but playmakers, right? Think of Gerald Everett as a receiver, not a number 2 tight end, but a receiver in this offense, where if you had to rank the Bears receivers across positions here, in some order, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and then Cole Kmet 3, Gerald Everett 4, Tyler Scott 5. Like, think of Gerald Everett as like signing another receiver. Like Cole, just as Cole Kmet, also a receiver here. We did a whole podcast kind of breaking down some of the things that Gerald Everett is going to add to this Chicago Bears offense. But like, if I had to assign a grade to the Gerald Everett signing, I know it was a little bit more expensive than you might like to pay your number 2 tight end, but I think the structure of the contract was friendly to the Chicago Bears in terms of where the guaranteed money is, and I think he's going to have a lot bigger of an impact than you might traditionally think of a number 2 tight end. So the Gerald Everett signing for me is an A-grade signing. He is a playmaker at tight end and a really good complement to what Cole Kmet already provides you. Gerald Everett is not the same style of big, bulky, inline blocker who you could mistake for an extra offensive lineman, a thin offensive lineman. Like, Cole Kmet's not heavy and he's not fat. He's not slow in that regard. But you know what I mean? Like, he's a blocker and a receiver, but he's a bigger threat as a blocker. Gerald Everett's less big of a threat as a blocker, still can block, but Everett is more dynamic as a receiver. He is faster. He is more explosive. He is shiftier. He is, I was going to say harder to bring down, but he's just a different type of hard to bring down, right? Like Cole Kmet is hard to bring down because he's big and strong. And Gerald Everett is hard to bring down because he's big and elusive, right? I mean, it's similar, but it's different in the sense that like Everett's gonna be hard to miss because he's gonna be able to be a little bit more slippery than a Cole Kmet, but the strength is still a part of his slipperiness. It's just a different style of like drag. Like Kmet's gonna drag a defender for a few extra yards, whereas Everett's gonna make you bounce off of him for a few extra yards. It's a slightly different style, but Everett is one of the leaders in missed tackles being forced at the tight end position. He's one of the better yards after catch tight ends in the NFL, can make the difficult catches, and can give Caleb Williams that other security blanket at tight end, that he can have a bunch of different options there. And then when you check it down to Gerald Everett for maybe 3 yards past the line of scrimmage, he can turn and take that into a first down. Obviously he's got to be matched up with the right player there and the right scheme, but like he's got the ability to do so. And the amount of versatility that it gives the offense to be able to come out with 2 tight ends that are threats in the passing game. So the defense will respond to 2 tight ends with heavier personnel on defense, so you get better matchups in the passing game, but can still run the ball behind those 2 tight ends. Like, this is really key to unlocking more of what Shane Waldron will want to do with this Chicago Bears offense, and will be key toward trying to get more out of one of the other free agent signings we haven't talked about yet, DeAndre Swift, signing from the Philadelphia Eagles. We talked on Friday's podcast to Louis DiBiase from Locked On Eagles. If you want to get the scoop from someone who's been covering the Philadelphia Eagles and seeing every snap, every play of DeAndre Swift last season, he did a great job of explaining what he did well in Philadelphia, where maybe the Eagles didn't use him as well as they would have liked to, and how you sort of get a scouting report on Swift. But we kind of use that to jump off to a look at some of the other running back discussions. And I've been pretty clear on my DeAndre Swift stance from the very beginning here. Like, he's a good football player. He is someone who is better than either of the running backs the Chicago Bears already had, and in that way adds to this Chicago Bears offense. He should be able to give you more as a receiver than either Khalil Herbert or Roschon Johnson. He's more of a true lead back, and obviously a player that Ryan Poles prioritized right out of the gate in free agency. But I don't think adding DeAndre Swift filled any kind of need, and I think of him as being extra and something more of a luxury added to this Bears offense that I would have rather used that money and that focus somewhere else on the roster. And I think it just doesn't move the needle a ton. Yes, he's a better player, but how much better does he make the Chicago Bears offense? And so that's where I get stuck with Swift, where it's like, it's not that the Bears signed a bad player, by no means, but just signed a player that they didn't necessarily need, and I'm still trying to weigh how much he actually makes this team better. So I give that a C grade in terms of Swift overall, because I think they paid too much, because I think it wasn't that big of a need to then also pay a lot for. And I think you could take that $8 million that DeAndre Swift, that you gave per year, that you gave to DeAndre Swift, and apply that $8 million to an edge rusher who signed with someone else, or a defensive tackle who signed with someone else, or another wide receiver to pair with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore, or a better center than Coleman Shelton and Ryan Bates. Like, that's where I'm left. I can't give the Swift grade a D or an F, because he's actually a pretty good football player and someone who will be productive in this Bears offense. And what I also like about it too is that, like, they're not relying on DeAndre Swift. We talked about this on Friday, where it's like, worst case scenario, if the worst case possible happens to Swift, he's just terrible or whatever, like, the Bears are not counting on him. If Swift gets hurt and misses this season or whatever, you still got Herbert, you still got Roschon Johnson, you're fine. You're not counting on DeAndre Swift to be everything for this Bears offense. You're just counting on him to be a better running back than what they had, and be, the go-to player for Caleb Williams to turn around and hand off to. So, like, I can't give it any worse than a C, because he's not a bad player by any means, but it's hard for me to go much higher than that, because I just don't feel like he adds that much more, and he was expensive, and compared to some of the other running back contracts, I don't think the Bears got a very good deal on him. I don't think they massively overpaid, but just wasn't, for a lot of different reasons, it just kind of leaves this kind of feeling on it. And I don't know scheme-wise how great the terms of run concepts. We'll see how Shane Waldron, with all these guys, right? We're obviously talking before they've even taken the field, but we'll see how Shane Waldron uses DeAndre Swift. And I think he has the possibility to squeeze more out of Swift than we saw even from the Philadelphia Eagles, and make Swift even that much more worth what the Chicago Bears paid for him and what he's going to be able to give them this season. So, as with all these guys, like, jury is still out. We can give them a paper grade right now, but then we'll see how they fit in the offense, how the season goes, how everything else happens around them, because none of these players will perform in a vacuum. Like, receivers can only do as well as the quarterbacks do. Offensive linemen, like, you rely on your fellow offensive linemen sometimes, and it can make guys look better or worse. Like, there's a lot of intermingling parts here, but in a vacuum, on paper, just not in love with DeAndre Swift for very different reasons. A very different C grade than the C that I give to Coleman Shelton and Ryan Bates, where that's just that position I wish they would have done more at, and I still have question marks. Swift, I'm feeling like, was it necessary? Does it add that much? Is it worth it? I'm not so sure either. Ryan Poles really put a lot of the emphasis on the offense, right? We just went through 5 different players, 4 different positions that really got a lot headed their way on offense. He did add some players on defense. The biggest headliner there, Kevin Byard, plus some other one-year deal type depth guys. So we'll turn our attention to that side of the ball and kind of put this all together for an overall free agency grade for Ryan Poles next on Locked On Bears. Ryan Poles' biggest defensive addition happened right before free agency. Before the negotiating window opened, Ryan Poles went out and signed his Eddie Jackson replacement. It's easy to forget that, like, Kevin Byard was a pre-free agency signing because he had been released by those same Philadelphia Eagles after having been traded there from the Tennessee Titans in the middle of last season. And so he still counts as part of this, free agent addition period, but he won't count in the compensatory pick formula. The Bears aren't going to be due any compensatory picks anyway. I don't think. We'll see how the math comes out on that, but still a key addition, someone who will step in and be a day one starter that you hope can get back to a higher level of play than what we saw this past season in Philadelphia. And I think there's good reason to believe so. On this podcast last week, we talked to the host of Locked On Tennessee Titans here in the Locked On Podcast Network, Tyler Rowland, about Byard's time in Tennessee and how it kind of changed over time and why they ultimately traded him and moved on, and how the Bears might be able to best use him. And I think there's some good and some bad to take away from that when it comes to Byard. That I don't think Byard is slowing down all that much per se. I think he was in a really bad situation in Philadelphia, and I think the Bears are going to get a better player in 2024 than we saw him be in Philadelphia in 2023. I don't think that means he's going to get back to Pro Bowl, All-Pro caliber safety play, but someone who can, I think, easily be worth the contract that the Chicago Bears ended up giving to him. And so when I look at Byard as a grade, like I like him better than what we saw from, like a DeAndre Swift signing by comparison, but I don't see him as quite the home run type of a Gerald Everett or a Keenan Allen. And so the math, the grade math there would put Kevin Byard at a B for me. Like, he's solid. He hasn't missed a game in his career, hasn't missed a practice in his career except for the birth of his child. He's reliable. We'll see how great he is, but he's more reliable to me than the options the Bears got at center. I'm not left with a question mark of ooh, is Byard going to be an upgrade? I mean, upgrade, I guess, versus Eddie Jackson is less of a question. It's more is Byard going to be good enough? And I think I'm pretty confident he'll be good enough. It's just a question of, is that average, above average, great? I think above average is kind of where I'm kind of setting my expectations for him. But we heard from Tyler Rowland as well that, Byard's better working downhill, more in the box, in the slot. He's not a true deep free safety like Eddie Jackson was. His skill set is a little bit closer to what Jaquan Brisker is than what Eddie Jackson is. So you've got two safeties in Chicago now that are better used ideally closer to the line of scrimmage, and they're both going to have to play deep more than you would like to. It's not as defined of a difference in those two different safeties that the Bears have. And so that's what keeps Byard from being more than a B for me, is scheme fit. We'll see what Matt Eberflus has in store for how he's going to use these two safeties, but it doesn't feel like it puts either one in the best position to be successful if Byard's trying to be Eddie Jackson. They're not going to make him do everything Eddie Jackson did, obviously, but you know what I mean? It's neither guy you feel are exactly where you'd want them to be, but both guys are capable of doing what the Bears are going to ask them to do. And so, again, it's on paper. We'll see if come game day, Byard really thrives in that back-end free safety role a little bit more than he has in the past. And with Brisker next to him and in a much better secondary and a much better defense, he gets back to great play, and the Bears are really, really happy with Byard. Or if maybe there's some adjustment along the way, and that's where I'm kind of left at a B. Decent value in free agency. It's basically a one-year deal with the option for a second year. I think the Bears still need to draft a safety ideally and get a long-term answer behind Byard. But for now this season, I'm not worried about any of the positions in the secondary. And that's what ultimately gives me a B grade for him there. I am left worried right now about this Chicago Bears defensive line. Ryan Poles hasn't been able to, for whatever reason, really concretely address that position so far this offseason. Montez Sweat, the in-season trade, was kind of the big move to address it this offseason, but you've lost Yannick Ngakoue. Well, you're led free agency. Yannick Ngakoue is still out there, but is not likely to come back here. Justin Jones gone elsewhere. So you've lost two starters from your defensive line last season and have not replaced them. And I don't think Yannick Ngakoue was very good last season. And I don't think Justin Jones was great either. So it's not to say wow, the Bears are missing these two really good players. But the idea was that you wanted to upgrade from both of those guys. And the Bears haven't done anything to replace either of those guys. So if you look at your defensive line depth chart right now, you're starting Montez Sweat and I guess DeMarcus Walker on the other outside spot. And then you're starting Gervon Dexter as your 3-technique defensive tackle next to Andrew Billings. So then your number 3 defensive end is either the guy they signed, Jake Martin, who's been a kind of a rotational guy in his career, or maybe Dominic Robinson, or they brought in Khalid Kareem from last season. But none of those guys to me are wow, I really am happy with that guy as my number 3. And I want DeMarcus Walker to be my number 3 edge rusher. I'd still like to address edge rusher in some way. And Ryan Poles has the option to do that in the NFL draft. I'm a little bit more comfortable with Gervon Dexter taking over as the starting 3-technique defensive tackle. I still have some question marks. I'd like to have another player there to rotate with him and not have to rely on him in year 2 in a featured pass rush role on the interior. They did sign Byron Cowart, who will end up playing, I think, more defensive tackle than he was more of a 3-4 defensive end in the past. So I think he'll be an interior guy for the Bears on this defensive line. So they've got, end of the bench guys they've brought in, but I wanted to see more of an impact on the defensive line. Understanding the draft is still there, but we're grading free agent additions so far. But I'm left kind of feeling having not addressed the defensive line in any meaningful way feels like an F for me. And I realize I'm trying to grade players they brought in. And so I'm not going to weigh that too hard in terms of an overall grade here, but it definitely feels like an F type of lack of addressing that spot. And we even last year, at least, they didn't get that premier edge rusher that you wanted, but they signed DeMarcus Walker and Rasheem Green, who I know Green wasn't all that good, but at least it felt like there was a little bit more added at that spot. They signed Andrew Billings as well. Like they were trying, they just didn't really get the guys, didn't get big time guys, but they still added more bodies at that spot. And it feels like the bodies they've added this year are even less so. Like I don't know that any of these guys they've signed are guaranteed to make the 53-man roster. So like there's kind of I don't know if it counts on the report card, but there's kind of a silent hidden F here of like really would have liked, if I'm grading his free agency as a whole, not addressing the defensive line at all is an F. Like, even if it didn't need to be, the top of the top, it didn't need to be Chris Jones, although he didn't really hit the market. It didn't need to be Christian Wilkins from the Dolphins, but I would have liked to see a little bit something more there in free agency at the defensive line position. So you add that into an A for Keenan Allen, an A for Gerald Everett, a B for Kevin Byard, C for DeAndre Swift, and a C for Coleman Shelton / Ryan Bates at the center position. Overall, I'm giving Ryan Poles a B in free agency, and I think that's fine. Like he's done a lot. Like he deserves credit for like building up this offense around Caleb Williams so that he's coming into a good spot. I would have liked it to be a slightly better spot, and I would have liked center to be a little bit better. Still want to do more at wide receiver, but like you're feeling all right about where this Bears offense is and their ability to take on a rookie quarterback right now. The defense, he filled the big hole that he absolutely had to. Kevin Byard was a necessity. You had to replace Eddie Jackson with somebody, and presumably in free agency, because you don't have a lot of draft capital to replace him at safety. So they got the one they had to have. Did you have to have a defensive end in free agency? I guess not. Did you have to have a defensive tackle? No, but I really would have liked one. But you had to have a safety, and like that's the difference there. So I'm left feeling like pretty good job on offense. I'd say he's like done an A on offense, and then on defense it's probably a C or so. But it's been a lot of offensive signings. The defense didn't need as much. Like the offense needed a couple of receivers, a tight end, center, maybe more depth in the offense. Like the offense needed a lot, and he addressed it with a lot. So like he did a good job there. The defense only really needed a safety and some defensive linemen, and he did like half of that. So like that's where overall I come away with a B. And that's fine. Like B's are a fine grade. B's not a bad grade. I got plenty of B's in high school and college. And like good for Ryan Poles. Like the teams that get A's in free agency don't usually translate to being super successful in the regular season. Like winning in free agency doesn't really mean a lot. And that's where I think trading for Keenan Allen is a really big part of that too, because trades tend to work better than free agent signings in a lot of these cases, not universally so. Hello, Chase Claypool, but generally you have a higher hit rate trading for a veteran player who's established as opposed to guys who that team allows to hit free agency. So I generally like what Ryan Poles has done. He certainly deserves the NFL draft to see how he will continue to finish this roster. And even last offseason, we saw they didn't sign Yannick Ngakoue until training camp. So free agency is not done by any means. I think the Bears are done with all their big signings, but in the next couple weeks, they might still sign some other guys to one-year deals, maybe some defensive linemen to one-year deals after the draft. They may go out and add a veteran or two, and certainly leading up to training camp, they could add more veteran players. So the team building process never ends, but I think we reached a point in free agency now where it was a good time to check in, hand out some grades for the big moves, and most of what happens from here on out will end up being smaller stuff outside of the NFL draft. That's where I want to turn our attention the rest of the week here on the Locked On Bears podcast. We're going to go through some different scenarios for the 9th overall pick. We're going to talk about the wide receivers in this draft, and in the coming weeks, we're going to do some more in-depth scouting reports. You really get to know what the Bears are going to get in Caleb Williams, some of the other options with the 9th pick, where the Bears can still add more draft picks, and so much more. So make sure then that you're subscribed to Locked On Bears on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for another listen, now that we're wrapping up Locked On Bears, we've got our Major League Baseball season preview that came out last week on our Locked On Sports Today channel to get you ready for opening day with all of our local experts across our MLB channel, whether you're a Cubs fan or a Sox fan. So you can go check out Locked On Sports Today or any of our Locked On MLB podcasts to get you ready for opening day. Coming back tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity to bear down.